I used to do this as a bit of a game, you know, and then after a few weeks, I suddenly realized, well, I thought, first of all, you're being very arrogant. But then I realized that 85% of the time I was right.
John, let me ask a quick question. Let me interrupt.
This is Will.
Will, sorry.
Yeah.
Let me ask a quick question. What you're describing to me is expertise that happens as a consequence of a lot of experience. And it is what I'm most curious about. And so let's take you as an example of an expert who has highly accurate pattern matching of what you see in students when you first encounter them and your prediction about what's going to happen to them as they go through some type of a program. Now what I want to know is, if first of all, I'm curious about how we would capture from you how you do that, and I believe it's possible. And secondly, if someone has captured how you do it, how would we teach it to somebody else effectively?
These are two big problems that, quite honestly, Dick, you've put your finger right on it. I'm having great problems.
All right, well, let me suggest to you that I think those are the two questions. Those are the two questions that face education today. Because that's what education is about, or should be about. It should be about capturing expertise and knowledge and transmitting it effectively to people so that they can apply it with equal facility to the people who generated that knowledge in the first place. And I think that we have ways to capture that expertise that people are not paying any attention to, because so much of it is, as you used the term, implicit. It's unconscious, actually. I don't think that probably you know exactly how you do what you do, because when you see those students and you watch their behavior, all of a sudden it just occurs to you, this fellow's going to do fine. And then it'll occur to you with someone else, whoa, here's a problem coming, and it's going to be this kind of a problem. So are you deeply aware of what you noticed? Generally, the case is, our evidence is, you're aware of about 30% of how you're doing that. But 70% of it, most of which is at the decision level, at the sort of deep mental analysis level, is not available to you because you've done it so much that it's automatic, just like talking or driving a car or whatever else you do automatically. So I want to find out how to capture that kind of information from experts and build it into an education. Even if it's information about how to solve a math problem. Math experts know how to solve problems. They have very quick strategies for them. And obviously some of those strategies require a lot of prior knowledge. That's why prior knowledge turns out to be very critical. There's certain areas of math you can't master until you've mastered the math that underlies it. But once you've done that, there are problem-solving strategies that are relevant to all areas of mathematics, but they're quite specific to the area and the type of problem. And that's where the rub comes in. There are very few general problem-solving strategies that can be applied effectively. And that's what I think swims upstream against the belief system that's out there on the part of a lot of teachers.
This is John speaking. May I speak?
Yes.
Okay. It's an unusual group that you have here, Dick, in that we are very international, except for probably Steve, I'll call him, in terms of our learning experiences. And although we are all English-speaking, I found myself, after I finished school 30 years ago, that my knowledge of my other languages was very critical in terms of creating the empathy needed to understand how other people would actually understand the English language. I found that my 7 years at this Swiss boarding school taught me the British English language. When I came here, I started to learn American, how it was spoken, but I always had to transmit this knowledge to non-native English speakers, usually with a base, it's German, French, any one of the African nations, any one of the Asian nations, and I found that understanding culturally where they were coming from was a critical part in my sentence structuring to try and cut through what you called your unlearning. I had to jump over all sorts of presuppositions that they had about everything that I was over here to try and get them to understand what I was communicating to them. I think that falls into the thesis that I heard you speaking about up front, in that understanding where the student is or the other party is a critical element from which one can then attack the new ideas that they have to accept. Oh, we do things differently here, so that they can actually learn these things. I find that in your environment, it's quite difficult, because you're dealing with a lot of intelligent young people who are eager to learn and want to learn, change their behavior, or improve themselves. I find that the business environment in which I deal, people would rather do things the exact same way as they did in the past, and yet I have to convince them to change. This all comes down, in my view, to the skills in communicating.
I think actually you've given a very rich example of the challenges of actually deciding what kind of prior knowledge is required to accomplish certain goals. I think there's some very subtle issues here that are really critical, like, for example, the cultural heritage a person has. And since all of us have lived in different countries and traveled quite a bit, one of the other things we realize is that we encounter people who, through their lifespan, have lived in different countries and have studied the same discipline in different languages. How many mathematicians do you know I know a number of physicists, for example, who studied physics in 4 or 5 different languages, who have to switch not just their language when they're thinking about these things, but they also have to switch their sort of cultural expectations. So the quick bottom line here is that prior knowledge is a critical factor in people's learning, and we still don't have a good way to measure it. Part of the reason is that it's... Oh, do you want to get somebody else on?
Yeah, Noel Thompson, who's a food technologist, is coming on board here.
Welcome, Noel.
I'm on now. Thanks, Steve.
And he has particular expertise through homeschooling. One of his children went through some rather interesting challenges, and the kid's now taking the bar exam, so he obviously did a very good job.
Hi, great.
Right.
Terrific.
So,
welcome, Noel.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
We're talking about learning styles and prior knowledge being a better place to start with, rather than trying to find out what the person's learning style is.
So Will asked a great question a few minutes ago, which is what do you replace it with? How do you get away from this notion of learning styles? And I think Steve was asking the same thing. And I've become very interested in how you